Hello, today let's talk about yet another Tripowin model. I suppose it should be pronounced as Cencibel. And unlike the Rhombus I reviewed some time ago, it's a single dynamic model that priced about $50, and actually it was really coldly made by Head-Fi and some reviewers of Head-Fi, but I've seen also pretty positive reviews for this model, so it was really interesting for me to find out what we've got at the end. I will add the links to the Linsol shop where I've got this model in the description, and let's have a closer look. It came in pretty big, not huge, but bigger than a regular $50 box. It was a bit damaged by postage, but still looks kind of okay. No polygraphy, just black cardboard with model name, with actually brand name. And inside you'll get this oversized case, pretty convenient if you want to store something besides the earphones themselves. And here we're getting good selection of tips, so like 3 pair of black ones, 3 pair of white ones, and earphones themselves with a stripe of velcro and the stock cable. So maybe it's not like super rich accessory set, but definitely better than average in this price tier. In terms of design, they have also common design made of acrylic, fit nicely into ears because of ergonomic shape. Spouts have slightly above average length, but sound isolation is average, so it will be enough for noisy street or public transport, but not more than that. And they have lip for holding the tips and protective grill. I see 2 vent holes, one on the inner side of earpiece and second one in the frontal side. I didn't test them during harsh wind because recently I don't have any, but in some cases possibly wind can blow into this vent hole. And nice interesting pattern for the faceplate. Not super bright, but definitely looks kind of interesting. Cable is made replaceable. Here used 2-pin connector without recessed socket or recessed pins, just classical basic 2-pin option. And stock cable is pretty nice. There are ear hooks formed, they help to reduce the microphonic effect and guide the cable properly around your ears. And cable itself just regular black wire, nicely braided, but it's pretty soft, not super soft, but soft enough to avoid issues with wearing or gives you some ergonomic problems. Here is the splitter with plastic chin slider, and underneath the splitter it goes directly to the regular 3.5mm jack. So they are matching in terms of design, both with connectors and splitter. So accurate, nice, neat build quality, nothing superb, but in general for this price range I think the presentation is on the good overall level. And of course about the sound, I gave them about 48 hours of burn-in. I didn't expect any significant changes, and actually it didn't happen. More important here is to find the proper tips, because it's important for all earphones, but usually for single dynamic driver models tip selection is even more important, because you can get a totally different experience based on the tips. And I understand why there are so mixed reviews for these earphones, because they have a really interesting and unusual tuning. In general, the mids and treble area here reminds me a little bit TC01, which I kinda liked. It's a natural presentation focused on the micro contrast, and because of that it really depends on the quality of records. But at the same time they also decided to boost here a deeper layers of bass, and actually at the dev on tracks with really deep bass, it builds an interesting foundation, and probably some people after that expect same amount of weight on the overall sonic spectrum, but trickily this model makes more focus on the micro contrast. So it's a bit unusual experience. I can't call it bad, but it's definitely like not option for everyone. Bass goes really deep, and the deeper layers of bass are accented, but accent on the mid and upper bass is less present than for the lowest layers, and at the same time they're not adding additional weight overall. They are more focused on the speed, on the punch, and focused on the representing slight nuances. So if you need like meaty or weighty bass, it's definitely not an option for you. From one hand, the deeper bass make it interesting for electronic music, but often it also lacks a bit body to represent that bass punches and kicks in the full manner. And with realistic instruments like double bass and other stuff, it gives a good sense of realism, but at the same time, because of the accented deeper bass, they make instruments a bit exaggerated in terms of size. So a bit unusual experience, but sometimes it can be fun, but other times it can be not. And example for the low frequencies will be the Antwoord Ugly Boy. So really powerful deep bass punches, and actually they use really deep bass here, so these earphones fit to this representation nicely. And natural resolving mids and treble highlights Yolandi voice and builds a really interesting contrast for this track. But it's not for all, not same for different tracks, so it depends on your taste and preferences. In general, this model suits more for those who prefer speed and clarity over weight. And the bass is transitioned nicely into mids and into treble. The coherence is a strong part of single dynamic driver model, of course. And the mids are also focused on the micro contrast, and that makes them really dependent on the quality of record. When record is perfect, you will get normal weight, you will get small nuances, you will get emotions and other stuff. Well, it's like what you got in the track, this model will represent. But if the track is below superbly recorded, there could be some lacking of weight and other stuff, because this model doesn't add any weight or doesn't try to highlight emotions or dynamics, sounding on the more monitoring level. Imagery stage is really wide, noticeably wider than average, and just about average in depth, so more wide than deep, but in general width is pretty surprisingly nice here. And of course, on the properly recorded things, you'll get all nuances of instruments and lot of details and stuff like that. And here, as an example, we'll use... No, it was example from the previous review. Here we will use Newsted single solo album and track Soldierhead from this album. Pretty aggressive with interesting bass line and more or less normally recorded. Not superbly, but more or less normal, and thanks to the neutrality of these earphones you'll get all nuances of guitar, you'll get a good sense of aggression, you'll get really clean and readable percussion, but also you'll get all the nuances of the record and all that typical inaccuracy that is typical for the heavy metal tracks. You'll get it and you'll hear it, so also you need to keep it in mind. And treble, it's pretty energetic with some spikes, so treble perception is also dependent on your sensitivity in some particular areas. If you are not super sensitive for some areas where they have spikes, you'll get energetic balanced treble, but if you have sensitivity, you'll get a bit of over-energetic type of treble. In general, extension is above average with normal resolution, even slightly more focus on the micro contrast, but at the same time with a really good weight distribution and really great basic overtone saturation. No things like layering or some other more rich stuff, more audiophilic things, but in general basic representation of treble is good, especially if you like energetic high frequencies. And example here will be Sting, typical example for the great treble, and I burn for you a lot of different bells, percussions and other stuff like that, and this earphone slightly highlighting them to give more pleasant, more tickling experience for this part. And also focus on the micro contrast, nicely highlight Sting's voice. In terms of pairing, they doesn't require anything superb, but some at least simple digital tonal converter would be nice. Otherwise, you'll hear all the issues of your smartphone audio part. If your smartphone has a really good sound from the headphone output, it can be used directly with these earphones, but not a lot of not much smartphones has this attention for the quality of audio. And speaking about the comparisons, there are a lot of models in this price segment, but from the recent one, KZ ZS10 Pro X that I reviewed recently, it's more mass market tuned, more traditional with more weight present, especially in the mid frequencies, more V-shaped, with more weight on the mid and upper bass, so like more traditional version of tuning. And I don't know, TC01 that I remembered recently, it's opposite thing, actually not opposite, they have in really common mids and treble, but here you'll get this surprising accent on the deeper bass. There are a lot of other models in this price segment, but I can't recall them all, so if you'll be interested in some comparisons, just feel free to ask me. If I will remember this model, I can write something about the comparisons. But in general, it's a really interesting model, but definitely not for the mass market, so I can't recommend you buy them blindly, but at the same time, I think they are worth listening if you're looking for something really unusual. Thank you for listening, thank you for your attention, and of course have a great day.